3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and welcome in truly across the continent today for another very exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants episode. If you're joining us for the first time, like so many of you are today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And you're catching us in a very exciting day for two big reasons. Number one, this is February, so this is our entire month solely dedicated to showcasing the most amazing women in science and exploration on planet Earth. We've had Egyptologists, paleontologists, Arctic explorers, botanists, and more. It has been a wild ride, and everything on our program is on our YouTube channel. So if you want to check out this program in 3 weeks or 3 years, or like 4,000 other shows, you can head there and do just that. And it's also exciting, particularly exciting, because you're joining us for Dr. Christine Wilkinson. So she joined us a few months back for Black Mammologist Week, a really epic celebration. Again, all those are on our YouTube channel, so do check them out there. And she's one of the most fun people we've ever had in setting up a series within our history. So I said, look, our big February month is coming. We have to have you back on. And it helps that she worked on one of the coolest topics on planet Earth, which is carnivore human coexistence. How do we live with big predators? Now, I grew up in Toronto, and coyotes were like a big feature there. They literally roamed down my street. I've seen coyotes on the hunt in the city. It's one of the coolest things ever. And East Africa is my favorite trip of all time, where one of my favorite creatures are really sort of maybe misjudged creature is the hyena. So today we're going to talk about those two creatures and Christine's amazing work in trying to understand more about these special creatures. So without further ado, I'm going to zip my lip, turn you over to Dr. Christine Wilkinson. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Nice to be here.
It's so nice to have you. It's been such a fun month. We're about smack dab in the middle. We got, I think, like half the programs left to go. So you get to be our absolute pinnacle at the top of the mountain and dive us in with this really fun topic. And I'll leave you to do just that.
Great. Thanks so much, Jesse. Hey, everybody. I'm Christine Wilkinson. I am a National Geographic explorer and a wildlife ecologist. And my research and conservation work is all about how wildlife move and behave in places where people live. So today I'm going to tell you a little about me, how I got into this work, and also why and how I study carnivores and their relationships with us, with people. So let's get started. So I grew up in Queens, New York. I spent my childhood there. This is a picture of me and my sister who might be watching right now. And my biggest exposure to animals was actually through the Bronx Zoo. So we would actually try to go to the zoo's free day every Wednesday during the summer, had a good time. But I was also always running around in the city pretending that I was the David Attenborough of Queens, and I had my own nature show. I was looking for squirrels and cockroaches and hornets and pigeons and all that good stuff. But I also really loved rats, so I included this rat picture. I call those the puppies of New York City because they're so big. I really loved them. I'd watch them all the time in the subway. I remember one year that they renovated parts of the subway and the rats disappeared for a while, and I was so sad. But of course, they were still there and they came back. And even though these urban animals were not what I was seeing on the nature shows on TV, I totally fell in love with them. And that's what got me hooked on wildlife. It was only later in my life I realized that maybe I had wanted to be a non-human animal when I was a kid. I remember actually saying I wanted to grow up to be a lion. And I remember several months in third grade where I pretended to be a dog with the wildly creative name of DOG. But actually, rather than fulfilling my dreams of being a non-human animal, I ended up working with animals. I ended up studying ecology, which is the interconnectedness of wildlife with the environment, at Cornell University. And that started me on this journey of working with lots of misunderstood, resilient animals in urban spaces and beyond. But the other thing I learned pretty early on is that wildlife conservation needs people. We actually all need to figure out ways to survive alongside each other, and we all need to be part of the solution. But understandably, that can be pretty difficult when the neighbors we're sharing our landscapes with are carnivores. And in fact, that's something I think many of us often take for granted. Large carnivores and other wildlife live alongside people in even the most pristine, quote unquote, untouched landscapes. So I included this picture in the lower right corner of the leopard with these tourist vehicles. I took this picture in a place called the Masai Mara in Kenya. And it's basically a national park. It's this beautiful landscape with lots of wildlife. You might think in a certain place like this that these leopards are just roaming free in landscape, doing their own thing, ignoring us. But actually, this leopard was using these tourist vehicles to better hunt a gazelle. So kind of hiding behind the vehicles. So you can see even in these landscapes that are like for the wildlife, we are interacting with each other. And you can imagine how much we influence one another and our shared well-being in these landscapes. So I study a lot of carnivores that interact with people, but today we'll be focusing on hyenas and on coyotes in particular. Now, you might be wondering how I ended up studying these two species that live literally half a world apart, but actually they have quite a lot in common with one another. So let's run through what coyotes and hyenas have in common. The first thing they have in common is that they're both very misunderstood. People kind of fear and dislike coyotes and hyenas. Let's get into it. So how many of you have seen this movie? If you're in a classroom, raise your hand. Let everybody around you know if you've seen this movie. Type in the chat if you've seen this movie. Give you a second.
It's the best movie.
It is one of my favorite movies. Or is anyone responding? Jesse?
Everyone's seen it. Everyone's seen the
Everyone's seen it.
It's the greatest.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you live under a rock, it's The Lion King. Okay, I really love The Lion King, but there's one reason I actually don't like it. Those of you who've seen this movie might have noticed that the hyenas are the bad guys in the movie. In the movie, they are shown as evil, trying to take over Simba's home. You might have noticed they're not only evil, but they're kind of dumb in the movie too, like Ed here on the right. And unfortunately, people do actually really dislike and sometimes even kill hyenas across most of their range. But I'm here today to tell you that the cartoon hyenas in The Lion King are almost nothing like hyenas in real life. Real life hyenas are very smart. They have awesome teamwork. They care for their families. And maybe by the end of today, I'll convince you that hyenas are cooler than lions. But back to what hyenas and coyotes have in common, because media depictions of coyotes are also not that great. This is Wile E. Coyote from the Looney Tunes. And the whole plot of the show is that in every episode, Wile E. tries to outsmart the Roadrunner and eat him, but fails and basically ends up getting pretty badly hurt. And you can take a really close look at how the artists drew Wile E. Coyote's face. They've made his eyes a really evil-looking yellow with a big, angry frown on his face. And in fact, just like spotted hyenas, coyotes have been really disliked across history. So on the left, we have a picture of wolf pelts. European colonizers here in the USA really tried and succeeded in large part in killing off the wolf in a lot of its range. But as a result, we got lots of coyotes moving into new habitats without the threat of the wolf. So then people started getting rid of coyotes too, which is the picture on the right. And this actually continues to this day, with coyotes being classified as vermin in a lot of different states, and even coyote killing contests going on in a lot of different places, even though there's no science to really back that up. But why are coyotes and hyenas so misunderstood and disliked by some people? Let's get into that as well. So there's some things about these two species that are confusing or kind of make people upset or afraid. And they basically are based in kind of their history and in their special adaptations they have. So one thing they also have in common that kind of feeds into this is that coyotes and hyenas have confusing taxonomy. So this is our vocab word in teal, and I'm going to explain what taxonomy is. Taxonomy is how scientists organize all living things by figuring out how they're related to one another, like a family tree. So there have been lots of confusing stories and myths that have been created and spread about how hyenas and coyotes fit into their family trees. So what are hyenas? They look like bears, cats, and dogs combined. How many of you, raise your hand or type in the chat, how many of you think that hyenas are most closely related to dogs?
Ooh, I love this question. And I want to stress YouTubers, like, be quick on the draw. We've got folks from all over today. I'm a biologist, so I'm like Christine. I would have said 1,000% yes for this when I was a kid. And we might be a little bit of a different answer. We've got a little bit of middling. We're not sure, Christine.
All right. Okay, raise your hand and type in the chat if you think hyenas are more closely related to cats.
It doesn't seem likely. Look at them. Come on, that's not a cat. Clearly, no way.
All right, let's find out. Let's find out. It turns out they're actually more like cats than they are like dogs or bears. So like I mentioned, scientists use something really similar to family trees that help them to organize which animals are more like each other. Just like you are more closely related to your sister or your brother than you are related to your cousins. So on this branch of the cladogram, which is like the family tree, are all of the animals that are most like cats. It's called Feliformia. So you have animals like civets, and you have the house cat and the lions. You have meerkats like Timon from the Lion King and mongooses. And on this branch are the hyenas. And even though we're talking about spotted hyenas today, there are actually 4 different species of hyenas. And then on this branch down here is Caniformia. That's the dog-like animals. So that's things like bears, skunks, dogs, coyotes, seals, and even more. So now when your friends and family say that hyenas look like dogs, you can tell them that hyenas are actually more closely related to your pet cat. Now, what about coyotes? Maybe you've heard of all of these hybrids, coy dogs, coy wolves, even dog oties. Are any of these even real? Well, it's complicated, but the short answer is kind of yes. So it turns out on the eastern side of North America, hybrids between dogs, wolves, and coyotes are not only real, but kind of common. Coyote-wolf hybrids go back to what I told you earlier about the wolves being hunted so heavily by people and the coyotes moving into the eastern spaces they weren't basically able to get into before. So they've been forced to hybridize with one another if there wasn't another mate around from their species when they were kind of colonizing those new areas. Meanwhile, as coyotes are moving east, they also sometimes bred with dogs. And wolves can also hybridize with dogs. So it can be a really big melting pot. Today, coyotes in the east have lots of different genetic mixes, although it's still mostly coyote genes. And the eastern coyotes, as you can see in this picture from Project Coyote, are bigger and heavier than the western coyotes. Another reason coyotes and hyenas are misunderstood and feared by people is because they are behaviorally flexible, our second vocab word. Being behaviorally flexible means they're able to adapt to lots of different environments and circumstances to figure out how to problem solve and how to survive. In other words, they are really, really clever. And people really don't like the idea of being outsmarted by a hyena or a coyote. So just how smart are they? We're going to do some trivia to find out. So here's your trivia question. And you're going to type in the letter that corresponds to your answer in the chat, or you're going to talk about it in your classroom. Spotted hyenas have been shown to outperform which species on some problem-solving tests? So they're better than which species for some problem-solving tests? Is it A, chimpanzees, B, baboons, C, crows, or D, dolphins?
I don't know the answer to this, but while we're waiting for our YouTube audience, they're a little bit delayed. Let's see what they come up with. I would say baboons, but not chimpanzees. And I doubt that they'd be in competitive things with a dolphin. Like, I don't think they'd do the same test for them because they're so different. So crows is our first pick. See if anyone else want to chime in. Okay, we've got more. We've got baboons as well. Okay, so B and C. That's our
B
pick.
and C. All right. Okay. So the answer is, drum roll, please. Chimpanzees. I know we didn't think that was the answer. But okay, so here's the thing. This picture here is from a problem-solving test that they did on hyenas, actually here near where I live in Berkeley, California. So there was a hyena clan at UC Berkeley for many years. And this is a cooperative problem-solving test. If you look at the hyenas, each pulling on a rope to figure out the puzzle together. Hyenas are really good at cooperative problem solving because they're social animals, which we'll get into in a second. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, for cooperative problem solving tests, they've actually had to be taught in some cases how to cooperate with one another. So spotted hyenas are naturally just a little bit better on some of these problem solving tests that require cooperation. And they're so good at cooperating because they are very social species, just like us. Spotted hyena families, which are called clans, are matrilineal, which means that the females are the boss. They rule everything and take care of the clans and stay with their female relatives for their whole lives. The males usually have to move out and find another clan. Spotted hyenas also have special social ranks. For example, if you are the #1 female in the clan, it's like you're the queen, and your high rank gets passed down to your cubs just because they are related to you. Since males usually leave the clan and go to another clan, all of the males in the clan are typically ranked lower than all of the females. That's right, girl power. For Women's History Month, or the month that we're celebrating here, Women in Science, it's perfect. So all that social behavior and communication is related to how intelligent these animals are. Among other things, hyenas use their complex communication skills to hunt, and they're actually really behaviorally flexible about what they hunt. So even though the Lion King shows hyenas as being scavengers, eating already dead things, or stealing food from the lions, it's actually usually the other way around. Lions are more likely to steal food from hyenas. So hyenas hunt and kill most of their food. They're apex predators, just like lions are, which means they're at the very top of the food chain, but they're flexible. They've been seen eating everything from caterpillars to elephants. Coyotes are also really good at problem solving. Scientists have tested coyotes on problem solving with puzzle boxes, like my friend Julie Young and her team did with these photos, and they're really good at it. They use their muzzle or their paws. And because coyotes are so behaviorally flexible, they're also really good at eating lots of different types of foods. I've seen coyotes digging into avocados. I've heard of them raiding wineries for their grapes. But on the other end of the spectrum, coyotes in certain locations also eat deer. And on the West Coast, they even scavenge for marine mammals like seals and beached whales that they find on the beaches. But coyotes and hyenas aren't just having these amazing adaptations that maybe people are a little bit afraid of sometimes. They also provide ecosystem services, our last vocab word. Ecosystem services are direct and indirect benefits that we, humans, get from nature. And in fact, we're all connected and part of nature. So what ecosystem services could hyenas and coyotes be providing to us? Take a second to look at this image of hyena skulls over time as they get older. What changes do you see? If you look at the top of the skull, where I have that arrow, you can see the ridge of bone called a sagittal crest gets a lot taller. You can also see that these parts on the cheek area, which are called the zygomatic arches, get a lot thicker and wider. These two parts of the skull are the simplest way to see that hyenas have a huge jaw muscle. Basically, that sagittal crest is nice and tall to have a lot of muscle attached to it. The zygomatic arches are big and wide for big muscles to go through. And in fact, spotted hyenas have one of the strongest bites in the entire animal kingdom, up to 1,000 pounds per square inch. Basically, hyenas are really good at chewing and biting, and they're called the bone crushers for a reason. Now, I bet you've been wondering what this picture on the left is. It's actually spotted hyena poop. The poop is often pure white because they can digest bone, and they're one of the few species that are able to digest bone in the whole world. And all of this means that spotted hyenas are excellent ecosystem cleaners. Scientists did a study in Ethiopia, in a city where hyenas eat out of trash piles and clean up livestock carcasses off the street, and found that without spotted hyenas around, there would be a lot more diseased livestock and people with diseases. So spotted hyenas are providing a really important service for us. Coyotes are also helping us out. Now, I don't like to call anything a pest. One man's pest is another man's treasure, as I like to say. But coyotes are regulating our rodent populations, eating lots of rats and mice that people tend to consider as pests. Coyotes are really able to make it work, even in small, dense cities like San Francisco, where I work and where these photos were taken. And it's even possible that coyotes could be regulating disease by eating these rodents, but the science doesn't have an answer on that yet. So maybe some of you can study that. Unfortunately, coyotes and hyenas also get into things. They can be involved in killing livestock or even pets, which can be so devastating. In fact, if you're wondering what's happening in this video, these hyenas were just chewing on my car's tires a moment before I took this video, which could have left me in a bit of a pinch if I got a flat tire at the hyena den. But even if people don't experience any of these conflicts with coyotes and hyenas, people can still be afraid because of what they've seen on the media or what their neighbors have experienced. And even our fears and concerns can all influence whether someone supports conserving these species. So my research is all about studying how carnivores live alongside us and how people experience these carnivores. That involves lots of different methods, but I'll show you a glimpse of 3 of them today: motion sense camera traps, GPS collars, and community-based science. And I'm going to be talking a lot about hyenas in these examples, but I'll try to sprinkle in some coyotes too. So even though we think of animals like hyenas living free and roaming around the landscape, there are actually a lot of places where hyenas live side by side with people and have to navigate the things that people put on the landscape. This photo is the national park where I work in Kenya, Lake Nakuru National Park. There is a really tall, mostly electric fence surrounding the entire park. And a big reason that it's there is to try and stop human-wildlife conflict. But if you look really closely at this photo, you can see my colleagues grabbing onto that electric wire because it's not electrified in that moment. And in fact, this fence was kind of on and off with the electricity so much that I leaned on it once by accident, thinking it would be not electric, not really thinking about it, and I got zapped, which was a fieldwork fail. But that's because this fence is really a lot of work to maintain. So sometimes, the electricity goes on and off, but the fence is there to help with conflict and to protect people from animals and to protect the animals from people. But the fences might also be affecting the ecology more broadly, since wildlife want to move through these fences and might not be able to. So we put up motion sense cameras like this one. You can zoom into this one. And this camera is basically something that allows us to look at wildlife that walk by, and this thing kind of senses their motion, and it'll take a picture or a video if they're walking by. And it's really helpful because you don't have to disturb the wildlife in order to get some information about them. A fun fact is we also put these metal boxes. It's really quite heavy. It's much heavier than the camera. We put the cameras inside, and these help us to protect these from wildlife that might want to get a little curious about them. So what do we do with our cameras? We put them up all over the fence, and we made this special classification system, if we go back to the slides, to understand how mammals are behaving around the national park fence. So we were looking at carnivores, we were looking at other animals as well. The most important behaviors that we were looking at were when animals crossed in and out of the national park, like you can see in this image up here. We also looked at when carnivores were kind of searching and trying to get through the fence, like you can see this leopard doing here. Now, before I show you the results, I'd love to tell you a story about another fieldwork fail involving a camera. So we'll zoom back into my screen here. So if you look at this camera, something's a little wrong with it, right? If you compare it to this one, it is broken.
Sad, yeah.
Right? Just a little broken. So I came back to check this camera, get the batteries out, look at what images we got. And I was so upset to find it like this because I was like, who would do this to my camera? Like, it looks kind of like, you have to get into this really robust metal box. They clearly targeted the important bits of the camera that were sticking out. And I was like, oh, someone doesn't like my research. And like maybe a person did this, sad. But when I looked at the photos, it was actually someone else. It was this endangered southern ground hornbill. This hornbill had spent over an hour attacking my camera, taking out all of its anger that the camera was in its territory, and really gave that camera a run for its money. And so I couldn't even be mad. I was laughing so hard at how much this bird was dedicated to destroying the camera. So these are the kinds of things you get into when you're working in the field. So what we saw, some of the things we saw, is that spotted hyenas are really adaptable to these fences, likely because of their intelligence. They're able to learn new tricks to get through these fences. Our cameras showed hyenas crossing in and out of the park every single day. So type in the chat or raise your hand if you've ever done any yoga or if your parents have ever done any yoga. For me, I like to call this downward facing hyena because it looks like hyenas are doing yoga to get through the fences. Now, remember when I told you that hyenas are really smart? Here's an example of what happens when you try to keep the hyenas and other animals from going in and out of the national park under the fence. So this person has just put these boulders here to block the way, but we think that hyenas can almost always figure out how to get through again pretty quickly. There he goes. And then the other thing that's happened is that the government has started trying to really outsmart the hyenas and stop them from digging. So they've tried to put in a special wire mesh that extends 3 feet into the ground so nobody can dig. But now we're seeing a really strange thing. This young hyena and many others are able to fit through this 4-inch by 4-inch mesh. Again, kind of reminding me of cats, right? Because cats, as we know, are kind of made of liquid when they're sitting in different places of different shapes. So now we're wondering what's going to happen with the hyenas with this new fence mesh. Now, in case you're wondering, I had to take a screenshot of this video. I couldn't show you the whole video. I do use cameras to study animals here in the San Francisco area of California. And coyotes are also really, really clever and good at crossing fences. This was one of a pair of coyotes that always went in and out of this fence here in Berkeley. They're also really good at jumping over fences. The second major tool I use to study these things are GPS collars. And once you get a collar on an animal, you can get a super fine scale picture of where the animal's going and how these animals are interacting with us. I brought a hyena collar that I took from one of my hyenas after the collar ran out of battery. So this collar you can see is pretty big, right? And it's got extra battery casings for me to be able to study the hyenas for longer. Nice thick materials because hyenas like to bite through things. They have that strong bite force. And this one was on a hyena for about 2.5 years. And it's still pretty good. I'm probably going to refurbish it and use it again. But you might be wondering, how do we even catch a hyena or a coyote? Just a quick warning, on the next slide, you're going to see some carcasses with some blood. Nature is messy. I'm trying to keep it real with you all. So I was fortunate to be gifted some 100 to 200 pounds of rotting cow meat the last time I was trying to catch hyenas and take their collars off. And the cow meat's really useful. I don't often have bait because you can see in the picture on the right, you can actually tie this up to a tree with some heavy wire so that the hyenas that you're trying to catch will stay in the area. And I just want you to know a couple of things because people always think working with carnivores is glamorous. You can see it's not. What you can't see is the smell of this photo. So I had to carry around that rotting cow meat in my car for 5 days because there was nowhere else to put it while we were doing this. And I don't even eat meat. So the whole thing was a very interesting experience. Okay, so since they're so social, hyenas communicate in many different ways. They use their body language and their voices to send messages to their clan, just like I'm using my hands to express myself. And they show excitement, right, to each other in different ways. So when we're bringing the hyenas into the area, we do that using their sounds, right? We do that using their calls to one another. The first one we're going to hear is called a whoop. Listen closely because we're going to all try to make a whoop in a second.
It's not coming through.
Oh no!
Oh no! It just did before we went live. Let's see. Maybe if we
okay,
snap the computer.
I can reshare the screen. Don't worry. Have no fear, audience. You will hear the whoop.
It's so worth it.
The last thing I do.
Yeah, of the sounds in nature, hyenas really do make some of the best things out there. So, dear.
All right.
Here we go. Take two with feeling.
Okay. Are we ready? We're gonna do it again.
Ready.
It's working. Great. Okay, listen closely because we're gonna do it.
Kind of like Yoda.
All right. So the whoop is used to call other hyenas over. Maybe if there's something good to eat, for example. So let's all give it a try. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. I hope that we all got a little energy out of that. So you can actually, in the wild, you can hear a hyena whoop from many miles away. It'll bring the hyenas into the area. If you were a hyena, you'd be calling your clan over to you with the whoops. Sometimes the babies try to do whoop. They sound really funny, like this, which is excellent. The second call that I want to play for you, because hyenas are famous for this, it's the giggle. So let's listen to the giggle.
Like when I've been tickled.
So exactly. So you might think, oh, they must be so happy. But actually, hyenas make this sound when they're excited or when they feel threatened. So these two calls are just a very small piece of the complex ways hyenas communicate. And once they're in, you can see the dart gun here in the middle of me and my friend who's the vet. She's just started a hyena whose collar we're going to take off. The hyena slowly falling asleep. The rangers are going to get her. And then we take the collar off and we do a bunch of other things to get measurements from the hyena before we wake her up. Okay, catching a coyote is a little bit different. So coyotes, from my experience and from the experience of people who have a lot more experience in this realm than I do, might be the most difficult animal to catch ever, maybe the most difficult mammal at least. So we use traps for them. So one trap that's really good for coyotes is called the collarum. And it's basically the coyote bites down on something yummy that's on what we call a bite matrix, and they're tugging on this object. and it throws a loop over their neck with a stopper, so it's nice and safe for them. And then they just kind of sit down and wait for us to come get them. And you'll put on a little bait on the little thing they're biting onto. People also sometimes use a lure, like a chemical lure, like the one in the top called deception. Everyone has a lure they swear by to kind of put it in the area, maybe a foot off the ground or a meter off the ground to catch the wind and bring coyotes into the area. My personal favorite that I love, it exists, is coyote urine. Every single one of you right now can ask your parents to go online and buy you a bottle of coyote urine. Sorry, parents, industrial grade. And honestly, this urine is a very interesting thing that you can buy online, but it's really helpful if you want to sprinkle it around the trap to get the coyotes interested. And then if you're really, really lucky, you have a man from Mississippi named Jimmy who's really good at trapping coyotes and really good at calling them in using a special tool that he's going to blow into. In this case, he used the sound of a cottontail in distress. So that was actually so effective that an owl swooped down on our heads while this was happening. It was kind of frightening. And that kind of brings them into the area. And then this is what it looks like to release a coyote. These are my colleagues, Neve, and that's Jimmy, who is doing the call. And this is in Irvine, California, an urban coyote. And off he goes. So what does it look like when we get the data? This is an example of GPS collar data from hyenas. It's just a couple of days of information from our collars. The collars use satellites to find out the animal's location, just like when you or your parents use Google Maps to get somewhere in the car. So for each animal in this case, we got a location every 5 minutes, a lot of data. We only take these locations at night since hyenas are more active at night. And you can see they're moving a lot. That blue one in the middle moves in and out of the national park into the communities and the conservancies almost every day. All right, we're almost near the end, but just a warning, there's going to be a few more carcasses on the next slide. In case you're feeling squeamish. So not only do hyenas eat wild animals, they also sometimes eat domestic animals like cows and sheep. So do coyotes, right? You can imagine how scary it would be to worry about your animals or your pets being eaten. So where I work in Kenya, for example, on the bottom left, some people put up special cow pens like these to keep the hyenas and other predators out. Hyenas or coyotes attacking livestock like sheep and cows is just one component of what we call human-carnivore conflict. But as I mentioned before, conflict also includes how people feel about the carnivores that live near them and the fears they have about those carnivores, or they might even retaliate against these carnivores by poisoning them or getting rid of their habitats. So to understand and solve human-carnivore conflict, it's important not just to know about carnivore behavior, but also to involve communities in the research. So that's what we do. So what are some ways that we involve communities in the research process when we're studying human-carnivore conflict? One tool we use is called participatory mapping. It helps us to understand how people see their surroundings and how they're experiencing conflict with hyenas and other carnivores. Basically, in the mapping sessions we did in Kenya, people were interviewed, then they would use a map to draw where they've experienced livestock predation, where they're afraid to go because hyenas and other carnivores are there, and where they think hyenas and other carnivores should be able to live on the landscape. And then we can make these paper maps into digital maps. And that tool really got the communities involved in our research from the beginning, let us hear what they thought was important for hyena conservation, and let us bring all of their experiences to the government that makes all the decisions. But to get involved in sharing your experiences with wildlife, you don't have to wait around for a participatory mapping project to come along. There are lots of apps out there for you to log your wildlife sightings as a community scientist, even kids. So there's examples like eBird, which is for birds, LeafSnap, which, as you can guess, is for plants, and iNaturalist, one of my favorites. That's for everything and was actually invented here in Berkeley. I also work with local agencies like San Francisco Animal Care and Control, who receive community sightings about coyotes through their website on a special monitoring form, which is pictured here. And these data are really important for understanding more details about what people are experiencing with urban coyotes. So here's an example of what we learned from the San Francisco Animal Care and Control Coyote Sightings database. You can see the hotspots of coyote sightings across the city for the past decade. And there are some places where people report coyotes all the time, other places where they're hardly ever seen or even reported. A lot of the reports also were not conflicts, which is great. So San Francisco might give us a window into what it will be like to live alongside and coexist with urban carnivores in a world where there are more and bigger cities being developed. So how will coyotes and hyenas coexist with people in the long term? As you've seen here, the answer is about really listening to the experiences of community members while doing more science to understand the behavior of these intelligent and misunderstood animals. So we're coming to the end now. I have to ask you all, raise your hand or write in the chat if you like hyenas and coyotes.
I sure do. I liked them before, so I'm like one of those people like you that like love them all, and I love pretty much every animal. In fact, I love all the animals on this chart. But if you didn't, hopefully you do now, because this has been an incredible story. That's what it's all about.
Are we getting any likers of hyenas and coyotes?
We've got likers, Christine. Everyone likes them now.
Good.
That's the joy of these broadcasts.
I'm glad I've convinced some of you that these animals are pretty cool, no matter what you see in the movies or on TV. I hope I've also convinced some of you that conservation is complicated. So even if you've never seen a hyena or a coyote in real life, there are so many other animals in our world that are misunderstood and have very complex conservation stories. Here are just a few that I can think of that are really interesting. And I guarantee that you all live near a misunderstood animal. So what can you do? I think it's really up to all of us to learn more about these misunderstood animals and about how conservation of all species is really complex. There isn't always a simple answer. To make conservation work and last a long time, it's up to us to work with our own communities and really listen to their perspectives and fears about these animals so we can work toward lasting conservation for these animals that are important for ecology and for our own well-being while empowering people. And of course, all you kids out there, don't forget to log your misunderstood animal sightings on a community science app like iNaturalist. And now I'll take your questions.
Oh, Christine, that was spectacular. Thank you so much. Professional detachment out the window. I so thoroughly enjoyed that. We're going to dive in with some great questions. So we got about 8 minutes together. So share as many as you guys want in the chat. We had a good one earlier, which is one of my favorite questions when we have stories like yours, which is, are the animals in danger in any way when you're darting them? You highlight sort of capturing them, doing tests on them and the like. I love the animal welfare angle. So tell us more.
Yeah, so actually, in order to ever touch a wild animal or do anything that might be something that could be manipulating them in any way, we go through a really huge process of ethical approval. So we're asked, and it goes through a board of people that includes veterinarians and scientists and even local community members who decide whether your project is going to be ethical and safe for the animal and for the people, and it's worth it for the science and the conservation application. And we have a whole long document where we justify it, where we lay out all of our safety procedures. So these animals are actually not in danger from being darted. We have very, very important and well thought out safety mechanisms for them. And we only do these, what we call invasive procedures, when it's going to be really helpful for their conservation, or otherwise we can't really get the science behind what they're doing.
Very cool. Thank you for the nuanced answer. And I always love when we get this question, because it sort of speaks to whether it's predators like this, whether it's sharks, whether it's crocodilians. Like, I mean, when people are dealing with animals, they are trained professionals, and I always like highlighting that for our audience. We have one about you. So you highlighted that the hyenas could have bitten the tires, you could have been stuck out there. Is there danger to you? I mean, these aren't huge predators, but they're big and toothy enough. When you're out in the field, is there anything you need to really worry about, or no?
Yeah, so actually, when I'm out in the field, I try not to be on foot. When I'm visiting the hyenas at the den, I'm definitely in a car, which is a pretty safe place to be, although it could be kind of annoying if they end up biting through my tires. Some of the things that I face more danger from than the carnivores are actually things like buffalo. The Cape buffalo in the area where I work used to be hunted, so they're kind of like aggressive. They have a big chip on their shoulder, and I have almost been severely hurt by buffalo, both on foot and in my car. More than a handful of times. So they scare me a lot more than the hyenas do.
This is a universal thing from everyone we've ever talked to who's worked in East and South Africa. Buffalo are the thing to be avoided. They're mean, they're angry, and they don't take anything from anyone. By the way, I want to go back to something just briefly in the presentation. The fact that you had a moment where it was industrial strength coyote urine buying online, and then a guy in Mississippi with a rabbit call. You're the only person to ever highlight that in the history of the program. So thank you very much for making my day with that.
No problem.
An easy or really hard one, depending on how you take it. Is there a favorite part of your job? Is there something that gets you up in the morning?
My favorite part of my job is that I think that it's really important and it can be potentially helpful for conservation. I've seen times when I've done a research project with people, say in Kenya or even here in California, where the results are used to change something about management or to help people in some way or to help wildlife in some way. So what gets me up in the morning is that I'm doing work that I think is really important, not just for the wildlife, but for people and their livelihoods and their well-being, even if it's hard and grueling sometimes.
Yeah, a thoughtful answer. Thanks, Christine. Now, you clearly have a lot of passion for the animals that you work with. We highlighted that throughout the entire program. But we've got a query about if there's any other species you'd love to work with. If there, whether it's herbivore, carnivore, anything else, human-animal coexistence, anything that jumps to mind that you'd like to work with. Are you stuck with our hyenas and coyotes because they're just so wicked?
I'm a huge connoisseur of human-wildlife coexistence. So I have worked on, like, at least tangentially, if not in more depth, with other animals that deal with people or that are living alongside people. But honestly, like, my number one favorite animal, I think, is the secretary bird.
No.
And if I could do something with the secretary bird, which, by the way, is a very tall bird that stomps on snakes and eats them, among other things, and they're a raptor species, so they're related to other birds that eat lots of meat. My favorite species. I've never done any work with them. I don't know what work I'd want to do with them, but I think they're amazing.
So just as this is, again, professional detachment totally out the window. At the beginning of the talk, you highlighted that, Attenborough, you were trying to be the Attenborough queen. So I was trying to be the Attenborough of Toronto, both at the same time. And you also highlighted my favorite snake in the world, which is the San Francisco garter, which I've never seen in a picture ever. Wicked, of course. And then secretary bird and East African birds are like the coolest. Ever just look up a secretary bird, they like stomp big snakes to death. Like a big cobra will come by, they're like, no. And they just like whack it. And they're so cool and they're so awesome. And I want to stress for our audience, too, if you're keen on human-animal coexistence, there's an amazing book. And this is like middle school and up, maybe high school. But Fuzz by Mary Roach is so good. She's such a great author in general, but some really, really great stories in there to keep the learning going.
And some of my friends in that book, too, quoted in that book.
Of course. Why not? Time flies and you're having fun. So we are nearing the end of the broadcast. But before we wrap up, is there any last message you want to leave our kids with today that might be keen on this as a topic, that might just be interested in learning more? Anywhere we can send them? Anything before we say goodbye?
Yeah, well, I just say, don't forget that we all live next to wildlife and we're all coexisting with them every day, even if you're in the most dense urban area. So you can go out, get to know your wildlife, learn more about how we're all connected to nature and what that means and why conservation is important for our own health as people, because I think we're going to need to understand that more and more. And one way you can do that is using an app like iNaturalist to go connect with nature and be able to see what you're seeing out there in the world.
I can't recommend it enough. We use iNaturalist every year for our Backyard Bio initiative. Honestly, you'll be amazed at what you can find close to home. And for those of you in the audience today that have done a program with Joe before, Joe literally went on iNaturalist, found out there was a snowy owl like 20 minutes from his house the other day, and went and saw a snowy owl, which would be like my dream in the bird world. So I encourage you to check that out. Use it. It's a lot of fun. Seek app for kids is like Pokemon Go for nature. So lots to explore and discover there. And I just thank you so much for all of this, audience. You guys are great. If you want to check out more on Dr. Christine, she's got a great website, great Instagram here, so you can check that out and learn even more. And for now, we'll say farewell to our YouTube audience. Have a wonderful day, everyone. And bye for now, guys. See you soon.
Bye.